Shocked Voxari General Lyra stared in disbelief as human soldiers continued to fight viciously despite horrific injuries, refusing to die even when missing limbs and bleeding profusely from shrapnel wounds. The endless war on planet Zephyria had dragged on for months. Lyra's technologically superior Voxari forces should have crushed the primitive human settlers immediately. But the stubborn humans just would not give up. Hundreds of human corpses littered the nuked, blasted hellscape, piled alongside wrecked Voxari tanks and walkers. Plumes of greasy smoke curled into the toxic sky. "General, the savage humans retreated to fortified bunkers in Scarred Canyon," reported Commander Zorix grimly, his sleek black armor splattered with blood and filth. "Our scouts say the humans took 90% casualties, but still refuse to surrender. They fight like crazed animals, like nothing we've ever seen before." Lyra narrowed her eyes coldly. "Enough. I will lead the elite Deathbringer shock troops to assault the bunkers personally. We'll show those primitives what it means to defy the Voxari Empire." Inside the battered human fort, bleeding soldier Timothy Taylor staggered into the command center. His face was a mask of soot, sweat, and determination. Colonel Jameson looked up from the holomap. "Status report, Taylor. Tell me some good news for once." Timothy gritted his teeth. "Down to 100 effectives, sir. Voxari murdered the rest. Their tech is beyond insane, light years past what we've got. But no one is surrendering. We'll fight these fuckers to the last breath." Jameson nodded grimly. Zephyria was humanity's last unclaimed outpost on the wild frontier. If the human settlers lost this brutal war, the Voxari would glass the planet from orbit and drive mankind to total extinction. There could be no retreat, no surrender. The humans had to win this battle, or the entire race dies. The pounding of artillery shells shook the canyon walls as Timothy hastily welded metal plates over the bunker's weak spots. Soldiers rushed to set up barricades and mount heavy weapons at choke points. A thunderous boom rocked the complex. Timothy raced up the stairs to the firing slits, peering out at the hellish battlefield. Voxari war machines lay shattered and burning, black smoke curling into the air. Suddenly, plasma bolts sizzled overhead, forcing him to duck. "Contact front," Sergeant Hawkins bellowed. A phalanx of Voxari warriors advanced, weapons blazing. At their head strode General Lyra, her black armor glistening in the harsh sun. She leveled her plasma rifle and fired, the searing bolts chewing through the humans' makeshift barricades. The human soldiers responded with a hail of lead, the staccato chatter of machine guns, and the whoosh of rockets filling the air. Voxari warriors fell, their armor punctured and smoldering, but more surged forward. "Fall back by squads," Colonel Jameson ordered over the comm. "Draw them into the kill zone." Timothy thumbed the detonator. A rippling series of explosions tore through the Voxari ranks, scattering bodies and debris. Key positions collapsed in on themselves, crushing alien soldiers beneath tons of rubble. Through the smoke and chaos, Timothy spotted a group of Voxari attempting to flank their position. Snatching up a bandolier of grenades, he sprinted towards them, plasma sizzling past his head. He jinked and dodged, leaping over the torn and blasted corpses of friend and foe alike. With a guttural roar, Timothy hurled the grenades into the midst of the Voxari. The explosions ripped through them, hurling broken bodies through the air like matchsticks. Pain lanced through Timothy's shoulder, a plasma bolt searing through his flesh and spinning him to the ground. Teeth clenched, he dragged himself back towards friendly lines, his blood staining the cracked earth. Despite the humans' ferocious defense, the Voxari's numbers and superior technology began to inexorably turn the tide. Colonel Jameson watched grimly as his soldiers fell back, their lines crumbling. He turned to the comms officer. "Prepare the EMP, we've got no choice." The officer nodded, hands shaking as he input the activation codes for their last resort weapon. The powerful EMP would fry every circuit for miles, including the Voxari's advanced weapons and vehicles. But it would also knock out the humans' automated defenses and communications in the process. They'd be utterly vulnerable in the aftermath. As the battle raged on, Colonel Jameson's finger hovered over the activation button, his jaw tight. This was it. All or nothing. The fate of the human race hung in the balance. Colonel Jameson slammed his fist on the activation button, sending a blinding surge of electromagnetic energy pulsing through the canyon. In an instant, the Voxari's plasma rifles and energy shields sputtered and died, leaving them momentarily defenseless. The humans' electronics also shut down, plunging their underground bunker into darkness. For a few heartbeats, an eerie silence descended over the battlefield. Then, with a roar of triumph, the human soldiers charged out of their fortifications, bayonets gleaming and makeshift clubs raised high. The Voxari fell back in confusion, their technological advantage suddenly stripped away. General Lyra ripped off her now useless helmet, her reptilian eyes narrowing in fury. "Forward, warriors of the Voxari," she bellowed. "Crush these primitives with the strength of your claws and fangs." Rallying behind their general, the Voxari surged to meet the human onslaught. The two forces clashed in a brutal melee, bayonets clanging against alien armor, clubs smashing into scaled flesh. Timothy Taylor, his wounded shoulder hastily bandaged, led his squad into the heart of the fray, his eyes locked with those of General Lyra across the chaotic battlefield. With a snarl, the Voxari general began cutting a path towards him, using her plasma rifle as a bludgeon to smash aside any human who dared to stand in her way. Timothy pushed forward to meet her, adrenaline and rage fueling his every step. As they closed the distance, he lunged forward, thrusting his bayonet towards Lyra's heart. The alien general parried the blow with her rifle, retaliating with a vicious strike to Timothy's injured shoulder. Pain exploded through Timothy's body, but he gritted his teeth and pressed the attack. He and Lyra traded blows in a deadly dance, human strength and tenacity pitted against Voxari skill and ferocity. All around them, the battle raged on. A desperate struggle for survival between two species locked in mortal combat. Colonel Jameson's voice rose above the din, raw and hoarse from shouting. "Hold the line, soldiers of Earth! We fight for our families, for our very existence. Drive these alien bastards back to the hell they came from." Emboldened by their commander's words, the humans fought with renewed vigor, slowly pushing the Voxari back towards the mouth of the canyon. For a moment, it seemed as though victory might be within their grasp. But then, a new horror emerged from the depths of the scarred canyons. A massive Voxari war machine, its hull shielded against the effects of the EMP, lumbered onto the battlefield. Its enormous plasma cannons swiveled to target the beleaguered human forces, glowing with deadly energy. The humans stared up at the mechanical monstrosity, their faces etched with a mixture of dread and grim determination. They knew this new threat could be the hammer blow that finally broke their desperate stand, but they also knew they had no choice but to fight to the bitter end. The war machine's cannons thrummed with power, preparing to unleash a barrage that would reduce the humans to ashes. In that moment, every human on the battlefield, from Colonel Jameson to Timothy Taylor, steeled themselves for the onslaught, ready to face their fate head-on. The air crackled with tension as the mechanical behemoth prepared to fire, the final titanic clash between humanity and the Voxari about to reach its climax in the blood-soaked sands of Zephyria. The massive Voxari war machine loomed over the battlefield, its plasma cannons thrumming with power as they charged up for a devastating barrage. Colonel Jameson, his face grim, barked out orders to his troops. "Focus fire on the joints and sensors. Hit it with everything we've got." The human soldiers unleashed a hail of rockets and heavy ordnance, the projectiles streaking through the air and slamming into the war machine's armored hide. Explosions blossomed across its surface as the humans concentrated their fire on the weak points identified by their intelligence reports. Amidst the chaos, Timothy and Lyra remained locked in their deadly duel, oblivious to the titanic machine that threatened to annihilate them all. They grappled with each other, their weapons forgotten as they struggled for dominance. Timothy stared into Lyra's eyes mere inches from his own. For a split second, he saw something flicker in their depths, a hint of doubt, a momentary hesitation that belied her fierce warrior exterior. Seizing the opportunity, Timothy reared back and slammed his forehead into Lyra's face. The Voxari general reeled, stunned by the sudden blow. Timothy's hands shot out, wrapping around her throat and squeezing with all his strength. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise and fear as she struggled against Timothy's grip. Her claws scrabbled at his arms, leaving bloody furrows in their wake, but the human soldier held on with grim determination. Just as Timothy felt Lyra's struggles begin to weaken, a searing pain lanced through his back. He gasped in agony, his grip on the Voxari general's throat slackening. A plasma-tipped spear protruded from his chest, courtesy of a Voxari soldier who had seen his leader in peril. Lyra shoved Timothy away, staggering to her feet. Her face was a mask of rage and humiliation as she raised her plasma rifle, preparing to end the human's life once and for all. But as she stared down at Timothy, bleeding and broken at her feet, something stayed her hand. A flicker of respect, perhaps even a hint of mercy, flashed in her eyes. Before she could decide his fate, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield. The human's relentless barrage had finally found its mark, and the Voxari war machine staggered and collapsed, its armor plating sheared away and its internal systems exposed. Cheers erupted from the human lines as they surged forward, pressing their advantage against the reeling Voxari forces. Lyra, seeing the tide turning against her troops, made a split-second decision. Barking out orders in her native tongue, she signaled for a retreat. The Voxari warriors, their discipline and training evident even in defeat, began to fall back, covering each other's withdrawal with precise bursts of plasma fire. As they disengaged, Lyra locked eyes with Timothy one last time. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition that their fates were now inextricably linked, and that their struggle would not end until one of them lay dead on the battlefield. The Voxari retreated into the depths of the scarred canyons, leaving the humans to tend to their wounded and regroup. Colonel Jameson, his face lined with exhaustion and grim determination, received an urgent transmission from Zephyria's orbital defenses. Their massive Voxari fleet had just entered the system, and they were preparing to launch a full-scale invasion of the planet. The battle in the canyons, it seemed, had been merely a prelude to the true war that was about to begin. As the Voxari fleet descended upon Zephyria, alarms blared across the human settlements. Colonel Jameson barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get those civilians to the bunkers now. Every able-bodied man and woman grab a weapon and report to your defensive positions." Timothy Taylor, his shoulder still throbbing from the plasma wound, gritted his teeth as a medic hastily slapped a bandage over the injury. Around him, the underground bunker buzzed with activity as soldiers rushed to prepare for the coming onslaught. Timothy nodded, grabbing his rifle and motioning for his squad to follow. They ascended to the surface, emerging into a scene of controlled chaos. Engineers swarmed over the planet's aging plasma cannons, their tools sparking as they worked to boost the weapon's power and upgrade targeting systems. Timothy joined them, his hands flying over the circuitry as he fought to push aside thoughts of Lyra. The Voxari general had spared his life once. Would she be leading the invasion? Would they cross paths again on the battlefield? He shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. Every second counted. The fate of Zephyria hung in the balance. As the Voxari fleet entered orbit, high above the settlements darkened with the silhouettes of massive warships. Suddenly the planet's defenses roared to life. Plasma cannons and missile batteries unleashed a torrent of fire, filling the void with streaks of destructive energy. The Voxari ships, their hulls shimmering with advanced shielding, returned fire with devastating precision. Explosions blossomed across the human defenses, consoles sparking and alarms screeching. "Brace for impact," Timothy shouted, gripping the edge of the plasma cannon as the ground shuddered beneath him. On the planet's surface, the roar of dropship engines filled the air. Lyra stood at the helm of the lead ship, her eyes fixed on the human settlements below. She had faced these humans in battle before, had seen the fierce determination in their eyes. They would not yield easily. As the dropships touched down, thousands of Voxari warriors poured forth, their plasma rifles at the ready. They surged towards the human defenses, their war cries echoing across the scarred landscape. The human defenders met them head-on, a ragtag force armed with a mix of scavenged Voxari tech and jury-rigged weapons. They fought with the desperate fury of those defending their homes, their families. Timothy found himself in the thick of the fighting, his rifle bucking in his hands as he fired into the advancing Voxari ranks. His squad took cover among the ruins of the settlement, using the debris as makeshift barricades. Through the smoke and chaos, Timothy caught sight of a familiar figure. Lyra, her plasma rifle blazing, led a charge towards the human lines. Their eyes met across the battlefield, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Without hesitation, Timothy broke from cover, sprinting towards the Voxari general. Plasma bolts sizzled past his head as he dodged and weaved, leaping over fallen bodies and shattered rubble. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. She raised her rifle, but Timothy was already upon her. They clashed in a flurry of blows, their weapons forgotten as they grappled with each other. Around them, the battle raged on. Human and Voxari forces locked in a deadly embrace. Explosions rocked the ground, the air thick with the stench of smoke and blood. Just as it seemed the Voxari might overwhelm the human defenses, a new sound filled the sky. Timothy and Lyra paused, their eyes drawn upward as a fleet of unknown ships dropped out of hyperspace. The newcomers wasted no time, their advanced weapons systems unleashing a barrage of fire upon the Voxari fleet. The invaders' shields buckled under the onslaught, their ships shuddering and breaking apart. On the ground, the tide of battle shifted. The Voxari forces, caught between the human defenders and this new threat, began to falter. Lyra barked orders, trying to rally her troops, but it was too late. As the Voxari lines crumbled, Timothy and Lyra found themselves cut off from their respective armies. They faced each other, battered and bloodied, their weapons at the ready. The stage was set for a final confrontation, even as the larger war took an unexpected turn. The fate of Zephyria, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance as these two warriors, human and Voxari, prepared to settle their score amidst the chaos of the battlefield. Amidst the ruins of the battle-scarred settlement, the sleek angular ships of the Quatori touched down, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Timothy and Lyra, their weapons still locked in a tense standoff, watched warily as the alien vessels settled onto the war-torn landscape, their iridescent hulls shimmering in the harsh light of Zephyria's twin suns. The hatch of the lead ship hissed open, and a contingent of tall, slender aliens emerged, their form-fitting armor glinting with an otherworldly sheen. They moved with an eerie grace, their long limbs flowing like water as they strode towards the two combatants. At the head of the group stood a towering figure, its amber eyes glowing with an inner light. As it approached, a small floating device detached from its armor and hovered near its head, translating the alien's melodic, multi-toned speech into a language that both Timothy and Lyra could understand. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her plasma rifle still trained on the alien leader. "What do you want with us?" she demanded, her voice laced with suspicion. "Why have you interfered in our war?" The Quatori leader spread its long, slender arms in a gesture of peace, the movement fluid and almost hypnotic. "We have been observing your conflict from afar," it explained, "and we see in it an opportunity for growth and understanding. The cycle of war and violence that has consumed your races for generations must end, lest it destroy you both." Timothy, his own weapon still at the ready, spoke up, his voice rough with exhaustion and skepticism. "And how do you propose to end this war?" he asked, his eyes flickering between the alien leader and Lyra. "Our people have been fighting for survival against the Voxari for years. There can be no peace until one side is victorious." The Quatori shook its head, its amber eyes pulsing with a soft, soothing light. "Victory through violence is no true victory at all," it said, its voice taking on a somber tone. "We offer an alternative path, one that will require great courage and sacrifice from both sides." The alien gestured to the ruins around them, the movement encompassing the shattered buildings and the bodies of the fallen. The Quatori have the power to end this war, but we will not do so through force of arms. Instead, we offer our technology and resources to help rebuild what has been lost, to forge a new future for both your peoples. Lyra and Timothy exchanged a wary glance, the weight of the Quatori's words hanging heavy in the air between them. The alien leader extended a slender hand, its iridescent skin shimmering in the light of the distant battle still raging overhead. "Come with us, warriors," it urged, its voice filled with an almost hypnotic intensity. "Let us show you the path to true peace and unity. The choice is yours, but know that the fate of your races hangs in the balance." As the Quatori leader awaited their response, Lyra and Timothy stood frozen, their minds racing with the implications of the aliens' offer. The war that had defined their lives, the conflict that had consumed their every waking moment, now seemed to hang in the balance, poised on the edge of a knife. The prospect of peace, once an unthinkable dream, now lay within their grasp, tantalizingly close. But the path forward was uncertain, fraught with the scars of the past and the weight of the sacrifices that had been made. Around them, the ruins of the settlement seemed to hold their breath, the shattered walls and broken streets bearing silent witness to the choices that would shape the fate of two worlds. And in the distance, the battle between the Quatori and the Voxari raged on, a stark reminder of the price of war and the fragility of hope in a universe torn asunder by conflict. As Lyra and Timothy stepped into the Quatori vessel, the hatch sealed shut behind them with a soft hiss. They found themselves in a long, curving corridor, its walls pulsing with intricate patterns of light. The air was cool and crisp, carrying a faint scent of something alien and unfamiliar. The Quatori leader glided ahead of them, its long robes trailing behind it as it led them deeper into the ship. Lyra and Timothy followed, their boots echoing on the smooth, metallic floor. They passed by strange consoles and holographic displays, each one more advanced and incomprehensible than the last. Finally, they arrived at a large circular chamber, its walls lined with pulsing crystals and shimmering energy fields. In the center of the room stood a towering structure, a massive crystal that seemed to hum with power. The Quatori leader approached the crystal, placing its slender hand on its surface. "This is the heart of our peacemaking technology," it said, its voice reverberating through the chamber, "a quantum resonance device, capable of bridging the gaps between minds and hearts." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder and apprehension. She reached out to touch the crystal, feeling its smooth, cool surface beneath her fingertips. "How does it work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can a machine bring an end to centuries of war and bloodshed?" The Quatori leader's amber eyes pulsed with a soft, warm light. The device creates a shared consciousness, a telepathic link between those who use it. It allows individuals to experience each other's thoughts, memories, and emotions, breaking down the barriers that separate them. Timothy frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. But what if it falls into the wrong hands? What if it's used to manipulate or control people's minds? The Quatori leader nodded, its expression one of understanding. "The device is not without its risks, but we have safeguards in place to prevent misuse. It can only be activated by those who enter into the link willingly, and its effects are temporary, lasting only as long as the users remain connected." Lyra and Timothy exchanged a glance, the weight of the decision heavy on their shoulders. The Quatori leader spoke again, its voice filled with hope and conviction. "We ask that you be the first to use the device, to forge a bond of understanding between your peoples. If you can find common ground, if you can see the humanity in each other, then perhaps there is hope for lasting peace." Lyra and Timothy stepped forward, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and anticipation. They placed their hands on the crystal's surface, feeling a sudden rush of energy coursing through their bodies. The world around them faded away, replaced by a kaleidoscope of memories and emotions. In that moment, they saw each other not as enemies but as fellow beings, each with their own hopes, dreams, and fears. They felt the pain of loss, the joy of victory, and the weight of responsibility that came with leadership. They saw the scars of war, both physical and emotional, and the toll it had taken on their people. As the link deepened, Lyra and Timothy found themselves standing in a vast, empty space, their minds connected on a level they had never experienced before. They looked at each other, seeing past the armor and the weapons, past the labels of human and Voxari, and into the very essence of their beings. "I never wanted this war," Lyra said, her voice echoing in the silence. "I never wanted to see my people suffer, to lose so many brave warriors in a fight that seemed to have no end." Timothy nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know, I feel the same way. We've been fighting for so long, we've forgotten what we're even fighting for. We've forgotten that we're all just trying to survive, to protect the ones we love." They reached out, their hands clasping together in a gesture of unity and hope. In that moment, they knew that the path forward would not be easy, that the scars of the past would not heal overnight, but they also knew that they had taken the first step, that they had seen the humanity in each other, and that there was a chance for a better future. As the link began to fade, Lyra and Timothy found themselves back in the Quatori ship, their hands still resting on the crystal's surface. They looked at each other, a newfound understanding and respect in their eyes. The Quatori leader smiled, its amber eyes glowing with pride and hope. "You have taken the first step on the path to peace," it said, its voice filled with warmth and compassion. "But the journey is far from over. There will be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome and wounds to heal. But if you hold fast to the bond you have forged today, if you remember the humanity you have seen in each other, then there is hope for a brighter tomorrow." Lyra and Timothy nodded, their resolve strengthened by the experience they had shared. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be those on both sides who would resist the call for peace. But they also knew that they had the power to change the course of history, to forge a new path for their people. As they stepped out of the Quatori ship and back onto the war-torn surface of Zephyria, Lyra and Timothy looked up at the sky, where the battle still raged between the Voxari and the mysterious alien fleet. They knew that the fight was far from over, that there were still many challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that they were no longer alone, that they had allies in the Quatori and in each other. And with that knowledge, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The fate of Zephyria, and the larger war between humanity and the Voxari, hung in the balance, waiting to be shaped by the choices they would make in the days and weeks to come. But for now, in this moment, there was hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness, a chance for a new beginning. Lyra and Timothy walked side by side, their footsteps echoing on the rocky ground. They had a long road ahead of them, a journey that would test their courage, their resilience, and their faith in each other. But they were ready to take on the challenges that lay before them, ready to fight for the future they believed in. As the link faded, Lyra and Timothy staggered back from the crystal, their minds reeling with the profound experience they had just shared. They looked at each other, seeing one another in an entirely new light. The hatred and enmity that had once burned between them had been replaced by a deep understanding and a shared sense of purpose. Lyra's eyes shone with a fierce determination as she turned to the Quatori leader. "We have to bring this technology to our people. If we can show them what we've seen, if we can make them understand each other as we now do, then maybe there's a chance for peace." The Quatori leader nodded, its amber eyes glowing with approval. "We will support you in this endeavor, but know that the path ahead will be fraught with difficulties. There will be those on both sides who resist change, who cling to the old ways of war and hatred." Timothy's jaw tightened with resolve. "We'll face that resistance together. We'll prove to them that there's another way forward, that peace is possible if we're willing to fight for it." The Quatori leader gestured, and a group of alien engineers stepped forward, carrying a series of small crystalline devices. These are portable quantum resonance units, designed to facilitate the sharing of consciousness on a smaller scale. Use them wisely. for they will be a powerful tool in your quest for peace." Lyra and Timothy each took a device, their hands trembling slightly as they felt the weight of the responsibility settling upon their shoulders. They knew the road ahead would be dangerous and uncertain, but they were determined to see their mission through, no matter the cost. As they made ready to depart the Quatori ship and return to the embattled surface of Zephyria, an urgent message came through on the ship's communications system. The Voxari fleet, having regrouped and rallied, was launching a massive counterattack against the Quatori and human forces. The Quatori leader turned to Lyra and Timothy, its voice filled with urgency. "You must go now while there is still time. We will hold off the Voxari assault for as long as we can, but the fate of your world now rests in your hands." Lyra and Timothy nodded grimly, steeling themselves for the battle ahead. They knew it would be the most important fight of their lives, not just for the survival of their peoples, but for the future of their entire world. As they stepped out of the Quatori ship and into the chaos of the war-torn battlefield, Lyra and Timothy were ready to face whatever challenges lay before them. No longer were they merely soldiers fighting for their own survival. They were now ambassadors of a new way forward, bearers of a hope that would light the way to a brighter future for all of Zephyria. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Lyra and Timothy sprinted across the blasted landscape, their armor scorched and dented from the ferocious fighting. Explosions shook the ground, sending geysers of dirt and debris skyward. The din of battle was deafening, the crash of ordnance, the crackle of energy weapons, the screams of the wounded and dying. They weaved through the maze of shattered fortifications and wrecked war machines. The crystalline resonance devices clutched tightly to their chests. Ahead, they could see the ragged lines of human and Voxari troops clashing in a brutal melee, energy blades sparking and rifles barking. Lyra spotted a cluster of Voxari warriors, pinned down behind the twisted wreckage of a hover tank. She turned to Timothy, shouting over the cacophony of battle, "I'll take the lead! Cover me!" As she neared the Voxari warriors, Lyra raised her resonance device high, its crystalline surface catching the harsh light of Zephyria's twin suns. "Hold your fire," she yelled, her voice cracking with desperation. "I come in peace." The Voxari soldiers hesitated, their weapons still trained on Lyra's armored form. One of them, a grizzled veteran with a plasma-scarred helmet, stepped forward warily. "What trickery is this?" he growled, his clawed finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle. Lyra held out the resonance device, her eyes pleading. "No tricks. This device, it can show you the truth. It can show you a way to end this war, to find peace." The Voxari warrior's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into every line of his scaled face. But before he could respond, a plasma bolt slammed into the ground nearby, showering them with molten shrapnel. "We don't have time for this," Timothy shouted, sprinting up to join Lyra. He thrust his own resonance device towards the Voxari warrior. "You have to trust us, please." The Voxari soldier hesitated a moment longer, then slowly reached out to take the device. As his clawed hand closed around the crystal, Lyra and Timothy shared a look of hope and trepidation. The first step had been taken, but the path ahead was still long and perilous. Around them the battle raged on, the fate of Zephyria hanging in the balance. But for a fleeting moment, as the resonance device began to glow in the Voxari warrior's grasp, it seemed that a flicker of something new had been kindled amidst the fires of war, a fragile spark of understanding, a glimmer of hope for a future beyond the bloodshed and hatred that had consumed their worlds for so long. As Lyra and Timothy set out from the Quatori ship, the crystalline resonance devices clutched tightly in their hands. The war-ravaged landscape of Zephyria stretched out before them. The once vibrant fields and forests now lay scorched and barren, pockmarked with craters, and littered with the twisted remains of destroyed war machines. They picked their way through the rubble, their senses on high alert for any signs of danger. In the distance, the sounds of battle still echoed across the plains, a reminder of the desperate struggle that continued to rage between the Voxari and the combined human and Quatori forces. As they walked, they encountered small groups of soldiers from both sides, huddled in makeshift shelters or gathered around flickering campfires. Some reacted with hostility, leveling their weapons at the approaching figures and shouting warnings to stay back. "We're not here to fight," Timothy called out, his voice calm but firm. He held up the resonance device, its crystalline surface glinting in the dim light. "We have something to show you, something that can change everything." Some of the soldiers scoffed, their faces twisted with skepticism and mistrust. "More alien tricks," a grizzled Voxari warrior spat, his clawed hand tightening around his plasma rifle. "We won't be fooled by your lies." But others, their eyes haunted by the horrors they had witnessed, seemed more receptive. They lowered their weapons, cautiously approaching Lyra and Timothy. "What is it?" a young human soldier asked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. "What can possibly end this nightmare?" Lyra stepped forward, her own resonance device held out in front of her. "This device can show you the truth," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "It can help you understand your enemy, to see them as more than just a target to be destroyed." She activated the device, and a soft, pulsing light began to emanate from its core. The soldiers gathered around, their eyes wide with wonder as the device's energy washed over them. One by one, they placed their hands on the crystal's surface, gasping as the flood of memories and emotions surged through their minds. I never knew," a Voxari soldier whispered, tears streaming down his scaly face. "The humans, they're not so different from us. They have families, dreams, fears, just like we do." As Lyra and Timothy watched, the soldiers began to talk, to share their stories and experiences. The barriers of hatred and mistrust slowly began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of empathy and connection. They moved from group to group, using the resonance devices to facilitate more of these transformative experiences. Slowly but surely, a network of individuals touched by the power of understanding began to grow, spreading out across the war-torn landscape like a web of hope. But their progress was not without its challenges. As they made their way deeper into Voxari-controlled territory, they faced increasing resistance from those who clung to the old ways of war and violence. One night, as they camped in the ruins of a bombed-out building, a group of Voxari insurgents ambushed them. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, shattering one of the resonance devices and forcing Lyra and Timothy to take cover behind a crumbling wall. Timothy returned fire, his rifle bucking in his hands as he fought to keep the attackers at bay. Beside him, Lyra cried out in pain as a plasma blast shattered her armor, searing through the flesh beneath. "Lyra!" Timothy screamed, his heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. He lunged towards her, dragging her back behind the wall as more plasma bolts whizzed overhead. Lyra groaned in agony, her face pale and slick with sweat. Timothy tore open a medkit with shaking hands, fumbling with the unfamiliar Voxari medical supplies as he tried to stem the flow of blood from her wound. "Stay with me," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "We're going to get through this. We have to." Lyra nodded weakly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The mission," she whispered, her eyes fluttering closed. "We can't let them stop us. We can't let them win." With a final burst of desperate energy, Timothy managed to patch up Lyra's wound and get her to safety. As they huddled in the darkness, the sounds of the insurgents' retreat fading into the night, they received an urgent message from the Quatori command ship. The Voxari counterattack had been repelled, but at a terrible cost. Many of the Quatori ships had been destroyed or critically damaged, and the Quatori leader itself had been gravely wounded in the battle. Timothy and Lyra exchanged a grim look, the weight of their mission settling heavily on their shoulders. They knew that time was running out, that the window of opportunity for peace was rapidly closing. "We have to split up," Lyra said, her voice still weak but filled with determination. "I'll go to the Voxari command center, try to reach the minds of the High Command. You go back to the human settlements, rally support for the peace initiative." Timothy nodded, his jaw tight with resolve. "We'll meet back at the Quatori ship in 3 days," he said, clasping Lyra's hand in his own. "We can do this. We have to." As they prepared to go their separate ways, Lyra and Timothy paused for a moment, their eyes locked in a silent exchange of hope and fear. They knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, that there was no guarantee of success. But they also knew that they had been given a chance, a fleeting opportunity to change the course of history, to forge a new path for their world, one that led away from the cycle of hatred and violence that had consumed it for so long. With a final embrace and a nod of determination, they set off on their respective missions, each carrying the fragile hope of a better tomorrow in their hearts. The stage was set for a final confrontation, not of weapons and armies, but of ideas and ideals. The fate of Zephyria hung in the balance, waiting to be shaped by the choices they would make in the critical days ahead. Lyra and Timothy, once bitter enemies, now stood united in their quest for peace, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in the name of a brighter future for all. Lyra strode into the Voxari command center, her head held high despite the weight of the quantum resonance unit in her hands. The device hummed with potential, a promise of the understanding and empathy it could bring to even the most hardened of hearts. As she entered the central chamber, the assembled Voxari generals and leaders turned to face her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Lyra met their gazes unflinchingly, her own eyes filled with a fierce determination. "I come bearing a message of peace," she declared, holding up the resonance unit. "A way to end this war, to forge a new path forward for our people." The Voxari leaders murmured among themselves, some scoffing at her words, others leaning forward with interest. Lyra activated the device, its crystalline surface pulsing with a soft, inviting light. "This device allows us to share our consciousness, to experience each other's thoughts and emotions, to understand, truly understand, the pain and suffering we have inflicted upon the humans of Zephyria." One by one, the Voxari leaders stepped forward, placing their hands upon the resonance unit. As they did, their eyes widened, their faces contorting with a mix of shock, sorrow, and sudden understanding. They saw through Lyra's eyes the devastation wrought upon human settlements, the families torn apart by war. They felt the weight of the losses she had endured, the pain of watching her fellow soldiers fall in battle. And they saw, too, the glimmer of hope that had been kindled by her unlikely alliance with Timothy, the promise of a future beyond the cycle of violence and hatred. As the shared consciousness experience faded, many of the Voxari leaders were visibly shaken, their hardened exteriors cracked by the sudden influx of empathy and understanding. Some wept openly, their clawed hands trembling as they grappled with the weight of their actions. But not all were swayed. A small group of hardliners, led by the ruthless General Zaxxon, sneered at the display of emotion, their eyes cold and unyielding. "This is weakness," Zaxxon spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "A betrayal of our people, of our very way of life. We are Voxari, proud and strong. We do not bend to the whims of our enemies." With a sudden violent motion, Zaxxon drew his plasma pistol, leveling it at Lyra's head. "You are a traitor to your kind, and you will pay the price for your treachery." Chaos erupted in the command center as Zaxxon's followers surged forward, weapons drawn. Those Voxari leaders who had been moved by the shared consciousness experience tried to intervene, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the hardliners' sudden assault. As she was thrown into a holding cell, Lyra's thoughts turned to Timothy, hoping against hope that he was faring better in his mission to rally support among the human settlers. For now, it seemed, the fate of their world rested on his shoulders, even as she faced the wrath of her own people. On the front lines of the war-torn human settlements, Timothy stood before a gathered crowd of soldiers and civilians, the quantum resonance unit held aloft in his hands. The faces before him were haggard and worn, etched with the scars of a lifetime of war and loss. "I know you're afraid," Timothy called out, his voice ringing with conviction. "I know you've seen the worst that the Voxari have to offer, that you've lost friends and family to their weapons. But I'm here to tell you that there is another way, a path to peace that we can forge together." He activated the resonance unit, its soft light pulsing in the dim, smoke-filled air. This device can show you the truth, can help you understand the Voxari, as I have come to understand them. Not as monsters, but as living, breathing beings, with hopes and fears, just like our own. I know it's hard to trust, to let go of the hatred and the fear. But if we don't, if we let this war consume us, then we're no better than the enemy we've been fighting for so long. We have to be stronger than that, to rise above the cycle of violence and hatred that has plagued our world for generations. Suddenly a shout rang out from the edge of the crowd. Incoming Voxari attack! The settlers scattered as plasma bolts rained down from the sky, the telltale signs of a massive Voxari assault. Soldiers rushed to their posts, weapons at the ready, as the first wave of enemy troops crested the horizon. Timothy cursed under his breath, realizing that Zaxxon and his hardliners must have seized control of the Voxari forces. The attack was relentless, the Voxari warriors surging forward with a ferocity born of desperation and hatred. As the human defenses began to buckle under the onslaught, Timothy knew he had to act fast. With a deep breath, he activated the quantum resonance unit, reaching out with his mind to make contact with Zaxxon's consciousness. In an instant, he found himself engulfed in a maelstrom of emotions, a lifetime of pain and anger and fear swirling around him like a storm. He saw through Zaxxon's eyes the countless battles, the friends lost, and the scars earned, the weight of a war that had consumed his every waking moment. But amidst the darkness, Timothy saw something else, a flicker of light that refused to be extinguished, a small, stubborn spark of empathy, buried beneath the layers of hatred and mistrust that had hardened Zaxxon's heart. With all his strength, Timothy reached out to that spark, nurturing it, fanning it into a flame. He poured into it all the hope and understanding he had gained, all the pain and sorrow he had witnessed, all the promise of a future beyond the cycle of war and death. And in that moment, he felt Zaxxon falter, his iron will crumbling beneath the sudden weight of understanding. The Voxari general staggered, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers as he grappled with the sudden realization of his enemy's humanity. Across the battlefield, the Voxari assault began to lose momentum, the warriors hesitating in their charge as they sensed the sudden change in their leader. The human forces rallied, pushing back against their attackers with renewed vigor and determination. In the heart of the Voxari command center, Lyra seized her chance. With a burst of desperate strength, she broke free from her captors, rallying those Voxari leaders who had been swayed by the resonance unit's power. Together, they fought their way out of the holding cells, racing to join the battle against Zaxxon and his hardliners. The clash was brutal and bloody. Voxari against Voxari, human against Voxari, a desperate struggle for the very soul of their world. Plasma bolts seared the air, explosions shook the earth, and warriors on both sides fell in droves. But in the end, the tide turned, the forces of peace and understanding prevailing against the hardliners' desperate stand. Zaxxon, his will broken and his forces scattered, was captured and brought before Lyra and Timothy, the weight of his defeat etched into every line of his face. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, the two unlikely allies stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, their armor scorched and their bodies battered, but their spirits unbroken. They looked out over the war-torn landscape of Zephyria, the scars of countless battles still fresh upon its surface. Lyra reached out, her clawed hand clasping Timothy's in a gesture of unity and determination. "We did it," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and emotion. "We've taken the first step, shown our people that there is another way." Timothy nodded, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. But the road ahead is long, and there will be many more challenges to face. This is only the beginning. "Then we'll face them together," Lyra said, her grip tightening on his hand. "No matter what comes, we'll stand side by side, and we'll build a future for our world that's worth fighting for." And with those words, a glimmer of hope began to rise over the shattered landscape of Zephyria, a small spark of light amidst the darkness. The seeds of peace had been planted, and though the journey ahead would be difficult and fraught with peril, Lyra and Timothy knew that they would not rest until those seeds had blossomed into a brighter tomorrow for all. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.